Hello, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing fabulously, thank you very much, and all the better for spending some quality time with you. And I've got a fabulous story for you tonight. So before we get started, you know the rules. Go and get that fabulous drink, whatever it is that you enjoy, whether it's something cool and refreshing for a hot day or something warm and comforting for a cold day. Go and get it because I've got a fabulous story. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, I felt exceedingly uncomfortable, rather restless and on edge, as I sat on a leather chair in the doctor's office, on the opposite side of an opulent mahogany desk that sparkled as brightly as gleaming glass, smelling strongly of lavender polish. The pale white walls of the office were pompously aligned with all the illustrious regalia of his conquests as an esteemed heart specialist, of which there were over a dozen framed certificates. My heart began thumping, while my fingers twiddled nervously. Even my feet failed to remain still as I tapped them awkwardly against the pristine red carpet of his plush upscale office. Thoughts were swimming in my mind, backwards and forwards, like dolphins gliding over the surf. What if the news wasn't good? What if I had a heart problem? What if I had heart disease? What if I had some incurable form of cancer? The thoughts wafted in and out of my mind, taunting me at every single turn. I knew he had the results of my blood tests. I was scared, really scared. Not to put too fine a point on it, I knew that over the last 10 years my health had declined substantially, taking a back seat in my life. Possibly now I was going to pay the price for my willful neglect. But what if the damage was already done? What if it was too late to fix anything? I recall the shock I had experienced 2 days prior when I was convinced I was experiencing some kind of a stroke. It all happened after I had taken a casual stroll to the baker's on the busy intersection between the corner of 3rd Street. For a moment I became very disorientated, while my eyes went blurred, dizzy and hazy. I lost control of my physical coordination, most especially my facial muscles that involuntarily began to twitch and spasm. Even now I'm not exactly sure how to explain the peculiar event, but I knew something was very wrong. I tried to mask this, but I was in a public place, and that was difficult to do. I am reclusive by nature, a reticent person who tends to shun the spotlight, or drawing any kind of unwelcome attention to myself. I've always preferred to blend in with the wallpaper, but sometimes things are very hard to conceal. I assure you, having a stroke in the middle of a busy intersection hardly goes unnoticed. A kind old woman driving down the road pulled up beside me in her car and called out to me, "Are you all right, dear? You look as white as a sheet. Can I give you a lift at all?" This would never have happened to me in Manhattan. People outside the big city cared about a stranger like me. But in Manhattan, I was just another nameless face among many. If something happened like this in the middle of the day in the hustle and bustle of the Big Apple, so many of the people would walk past, barely stopping to draw breath, as in their eyes you were just part of the big anonymous crowd. But here in West Virginia, it was exceedingly different. People actually cared. Sometimes there's an angel in our midst of the humankind, and on this occasion, this kindly lady was mine when she came to my rescue. She was generous enough to give me a lift back home, which wasn't very far away. I'd been too afraid to go straight to the doctor's after this anomalous event. I knew I should have done so, but I was so good at delaying what I didn't want to confront, until the fear became so overwhelming and so unbearable that I simply had to make that appointment. I was so good at that, not daring to face what was staring me blindly in the face like a bright red warning flag, telling me to stop and start paying attention. I lived in a small apartment above a convenience store in a neighborhood outside Charleston, West Virginia, after having recently moved back down here from Manhattan, New York, to be close to my ailing mother, who was now in a nursing home in a fragile state of health. I was her only son, who felt a level of responsibility to offer her support in the last few remaining years of her life, which is why I had subsequently returned home, Back to the very place that rekindled invidious memories of my ex-wife. I would rather have been anywhere else in the entire world than here, if the truth be told. But sometimes we have to do things that go way beyond our comfort zone, because they're the right thing to do. I had moved from Charleston to New York to just disappear, to become indiscernible in a crowd, easily eclipsed by the honking yellow taxicabs, the high-rise buildings, the bustling people rushing to their jobs. I came to New York over 10 years ago, after a very unpleasant divorce. I was desirous to become one of the nameless, obscure, faceless people among many that disappeared seamlessly into a crowd. I liked being unknown, incognito, inconspicuous and invisible. It made me feel safe, protected, sheltered from the cruel, unkind world that had been torn apart for me so catastrophically when I had accidentally stumbled across my ex-wife's vindictive, spiteful words written about me in her personal diary. I know I should never have looked. Her diary was personal, but I just did so for a fleeting second. Whoever said words can't harm you? They're sadly mistaken about that. For the words in her diary still haunted me 10 years later. They cut me deeper and deeper in my gut, like the sharp razors separating bone and sinew. Even thinking about them hurt so bad, ushering in feelings of self-condemnation, hatred and hopelessness, like unwelcome, obnoxious guests you wish you had never invited to the party. It read, "I can't stand the sight of Andrew. He makes my stomach squirm, recoil in disgust when he dares to touch me. When he does, I want to be violently sick. Everything about him is hideous. He repulses me." I didn't dare read any more. I couldn't. I remember leaving a note for her on the bedside table saying, "It's over. Would like a divorce, please. Thanks, Andrew." It was as plain sailing as that. At least I had the dignity, fortitude and presence of mind to walk away. I had grabbed a suitcase of clothes and had left for New York, where I had found an administrative job with the postal service. I felt so hollow, vacuous, empty inside, as if everything in me had lost its way. It was like I was stumbling around in the darkness, living a life on autopilot, going through the motions of my drudgerous daily routines, choosing not to pay any attention to my thoughts, as thinking hurt, really, really hurt. It brought with it a tidal wave of emotions that would come crashing down like a thunderous, violent tsunami, causing devastation in its wake. A dreadful chaos, a kaleidoscope of contrasting emotions that I didn't want to confront. I didn't touch food during the day at all in my administrative job. I was so busy at work. My thoughts were otherwise engaged. But at night, that was when the real damage was done. When I returned home, I ordered takeaways, watched television, enjoyed a few beers. I needed the distraction. When you overeat, it's very reassuring, as the filling effect of stuffing your face with food upholsters the emptiness inside you, so that hollow space can be filled. It also brings on feelings of sluggishness and exhaustion, which I always welcomed, as it invariably means sleep is inevitable. I loved to doze off and fall asleep. It was always a relief, escapism from our reality to a world of dreams that I could never ever remember when I finally did awaken. Over the years, I had always taken my health for granted, eaten what I wanted to eat, barely ever exercising. But now I was paying the price for the years of eating junk food and allowing my weight to escalate, to slip out of control. I had seen my waist size increase exponentially, but I never did anything to tackle the problem. I denied everything. I truly believe I was in denial, afraid to admit to myself that every year I was getting fatter and fatter and fatter. Perhaps there was a small part of me that wanted to be unattractive towards women, to protect myself from ever being hurt again. I do not know what went wrong with my relationship, but I had married a woman called Deborah, with a narcissistic personality type, who was only ever interested in herself. In her day, she'd been a looker who had turned heads wherever she went, and 10 years on, she probably still was. I'm sure she was taking care of the thing she loved best in the world, herself. At the time when I married her, I thought I'd won the lottery. marrying a woman on the surface that looked so attractive. She was like that exquisite-looking cake at the baker's that looks irresistible on the outside, that you simply can't wait to eat it. But once you take a bite into it, it has absolutely no flavour, no depth, no taste. That was Deborah for you, nondescript on the inside. On the outside, very beguiling. When I got married, I do remember hoping that with time we could somehow connect, but we never ever did. Over the years, she became increasingly distant, sleeping in separate bedrooms from me, going out at random whenever she chose for what she claimed were the proverbial girls' nights out. We were like two passing ships in the night, or two lodgers sharing the same home, with about as much intimacy as a cat has with a mouse. I learnt later she was having an affair, but the less said about that the better. I had learnt that it was with her gym instructor, so I'm sure he was all brawn. In a nutshell, everything she was looking for. If he had a full wallet, then she would be in heaven. But it better be very full. Back to my appointment at the doctor's office. I could hear fast feet moving towards the door. A man in his mid-40s entered the room. The epitome of good health. A lean, lanky, muscular body, complemented by a warm, generous smile that met his hazel eyes. I glanced at what he was wearing. He was smart, elegantly attired in a designer shirt with pants, along with a very debonair pair of crocodile skin shoes. Next to him, I felt like a big blimp, a great big hulking blob of lard. I was feeling unduly self-conscious. "Oh, hello," said the doctor, taking a seat at his desk, his eyes swiftly darting through my blood tests. He looked up from the paper, looking directly at me through his concerned eyes. "I think it's safe to say you have had some kind of a mini-stroke. I hope that is a wake-up call for you. It's your body's way of crying out for help. I don't need to tell you that you're seriously overweight. You need to lose about 50 kilos. You're a borderline diabetic with high blood pressure and a fatty liver. But the good news is that with careful eating, you can manage to lose the weight. Your blood pressure and sugar will return to normal, and it also should reverse the fatty liver. But now is the time to take action. I will be referring you to a dietitian to help you with your meal plan, and I would like to encourage you to make sure you eat lots of vegetables. Now it's up to you to start taking a little exercise. Walking is what I recommend to all my patients. It doesn't bring on a cortisol response. Anything that causes stress to the body, including exercise, increases the stress hormone called cortisol, which ultimately causes weight gain. So we want to push the body very gently, so it helps you to shed weight. "Tell me what your diet is in a day," he asked me pointedly. I felt very embarrassed. "It's mostly fatty food, so I don't have to cook. I live on my own. I eat all the wrong things, Doc, like pizza, burritos, pies, kebabs, burgers. You know the sort of thing. Washed down with lots of beer, I'm afraid." "I thought as much," said the doctor. "You're not telling me something I didn't know. You're not the only patient that I have who has an addiction to all these carbohydrates. You need to look on your body as a temple. If you respect it, it will respect you. You'll need to make an appointment in 6 weeks' time with me, and I'd like to check your progress." If there was any comforting, consoling news, or light at the end of the tunnel for me, it would seem that if I could change my dietary intake and increase my exercise, then I could almost certainly reverse some of the damage I'd done. It wasn't too late. So began my tumultuous weight loss journey. A year later, I had lost all the weight. I was slowly emerging from my shell like a tortoise, cautious, watchful, very wary. I wasn't ashamed to look in the mirror anymore. I looked as if I'd grown younger, better looking and fitter. I felt much better on the inside and was no longer on medication of any kind. It had not escaped my attention that I was getting hit on by various women quite regularly, something that had never happened to me before. Losing the weight does not mean that you miraculously become confident overnight, because deep down inside you, you still feel as hollow as you did before. So I was always brushing off any female advances, My ex-girlfriend's words still rung in my head like a resounding bell. He repulses me. He repulses me. He repulses me. Making my stomach squirm. That was enough to make me run for cover and hide from all these women that showed interest in me. If they opened the wrapper, tasted the chocolate, they would always be disgusted, I thought. So low was my self-esteem back then. In the rural area where I resided outside Charleston, it was heavily fringed by natural wood groves. I had learnt of a pretty woodland trail not far from my apartment, where I began to walk regularly. I would go on an hour's hike. I loved entering the woods. I enjoyed breathing in the fresh, rejuvenating air, the soft wind blowing against my face, the pretty views. Furthermore, the forest on the trail was spectacularly beautiful, consisting of mature maples, sycamores, larches, chestnuts and oak trees. They were so graceful, statuesque and imposing, sturdy in their trunks, exceedingly old. They flowed seamlessly together in a musical sequence as their branches intermingled like long outstretched arms, providing a vast canopy that allowed trickles of sunlight to dance through the leaves, bespeckling the forest floor in an ethereal luminescence. Sometimes, with a gust of wind, their branches would shake, the leaves rustle, as if in some way the trees themselves were dancing. I was drawn to this wooded sanctuary. I could understand why a hunter could hang out in the woods for days at a time in pursuit of his quarry. It made perfect sense to me, for this treed oasis, this soulful, restful place, enveloped you in a tranquil warmth and reassurance like no other. It was a place where you felt nurtured, protected and restored, as if the maternal instinct of the trees themselves wrapped you, cloaked you in their warm energy, cradling you in their bosom with the unconditional love of the universe, or the good Lord himself. On this particular occasion, my walk felt different. The forest felt different. I realised that it was quieter than usual. So still, in fact, that the soundless impact of the space was really rather unsettling. The forest normally welcomed me, with pretty sounds of birds, the rustle of the leaves, the transient shadow of a squirrel darting up a branch, eyeing me with wide brown, curious eyes, or a sagacious deer caught off guard, bounding through the trees upon encountering me. There were none of those, just dead silence. I was feeling uneasy, but I didn't listen to that inner voice telling me to retreat while I was ahead. It was then that I felt a presence, something sizable, substantial, big, disturbing. It was watching me. I could feel those eyes drilling through me, but I saw nothing. I continued walking, discerning a large pile of acorns under a tree, and I wondered who had gathered them together like this, as this was not the work of a squirrel. I reached down to pick up an acorn, and that was when I heard a warning growl. My first thought was that it was a mountain lion, which was enough to get my attention. I knew better than to continue walking, so I was about to retreat from whence I came. All of a sudden, I discerned a cursory shadow peeking at me from behind the tree. I felt heartily relieved. A kid was playing games with me, so there was no mountain lion in the vicinity after all. It must have been a kid that had made that growl. I was being set up. This was not the first time I'd been pranked by children that I didn't even know, nor would it be the last either. As a joke, I started throwing a few acorns at the very spot where I'd seen the shadow of the little kid darting for cover. It was my way of saying, "I know where you're hiding." All of a sudden, in retaliation for the acorn, came a large rock, thundering towards me, tumbling onto the ground with a brutal force, lifting up the forest dirt as it fell. This was not funny. I was really rather startled and appalled. It was one thing throwing acorns at a person, but throwing rocks at someone was exceedingly dangerous. These kids were being reckless. "Now, kids, you've had your fun and games. I know you're there, but throwing rocks is exceedingly dangerous. You could potentially kill someone." There was a silence for a moment, and then once again a rock came hurtling towards me, missing me by yards. Now I really was enraged. Kids should not get away with behaviour like this, I thought, feeling indignation rising up in my gut. Unhesitantly, I ran towards the tree, where I'd seen the shadowy figure hiding. At first I didn't know what I was seeing. It was like this gargantuan, hefty shape, like a giant just covered in long, flowing black hair. But when its head swiveled around to look directly at me, I knew exactly what it was. I was completely caught off guard. This was not what I was expecting. Standing yards away from me was a Bigfoot, towering at 8 foot off the ground. He was wide, burly, exceedingly stockily built, with colossal shoulders, thin muscular legs, and long arms. We locked eyes, his deep-set dark eyes latched into mine. It felt like he was looking through me with an X-ray vision, almost as if he was reading my very thoughts. I couldn't look away. I seemed drawn into the depths of his eyes, almost as if I'd come under some kind of hypnotic spell, and try as I might, I couldn't look away. I do remember the creature lunged towards me. He threw me into his arms, running with me, dangling over his shoulders rather like a sack of oranges. He ran like the wind, his feet graceful and agile, hitting the ground with 5-foot strides, moving through the woods at a phenomenal pace, covering a vast distance of unfamiliar terrain. I recall the rise and fall of my own breathing that became more and more rapid, the thundering of my heart bounding through my chest like a herd of trumpeting elephants. Boom, boom, boom. I recall the smell of his hair. It was woody, smoky and musky, with a hint of human-like sweat. Not unpleasant, though. I could see the gentle breeze causing his hair to twitch as the wind moved. I could feel his heart thumping, hear his breathing that was deep like a horse. He bounded with me effortlessly through so much territory, up and down rocky mountainous trails. I felt weightless on his shoulders, fragile, vulnerable. I wanted to scream out, but my vocal cords were tied in knots. My throat was dry, scratchy and parched. It was all so surreal. It seemed like a dream. That was all I remember. The next thing I knew was I found myself waking up in a farmer's field, 24 hours' drive away from where I lived. Someone was shaking me wide awake. A man was peering over me with a look of deep concern on his face. I sat up in the field, looking startled and confused, with a befuddled expression on my face. Who are you?" I asked, looking at the man, who was standing close to his red tractor. I couldn't understand how I could have turned up in the middle of his field. I had no idea where I was. "I could ask you the very same question," said the farmer. "You are on my farm, in the middle of a field. Do you happen to know how you got here? And more importantly, are you all right?" "I'm not sure," I said. "I feel rather dizzy, confused, disorientated." The farmer pulled me to my feet gently. "I'm taking you back to the farmhouse to see my wife. She'll help you to find your bearings. It's not the first time that this has happened to us." His wife was a rarely sweet woman who, upon seeing me, bustled me into the kitchen, making me a hot cup of sweet tea. "You look so dazed," she said. Oh dear. Your eyes almost seem locked in a trance. Do you actually know what day of the week it is, sweetie?" "It's Saturday," I said. "It's not Saturday," she informed me. "It's Wednesday morning." "What?" I said. "No, but that can't be right. That would mean I'm missing 4 days. I don't understand. That's not even possible." "You're not the first one Jack has found in your peculiar state. 5 years ago, my husband found another man like yourself lying in the field in exactly the same place where you were found sleeping. He also appeared to have missing time like you do. I think he lost about 3 days. He had no idea where he was. He was far more confused than you are." "Did he say what happened to him?" I asked. "No, he was very guarded," said the farmer's wife. "He mentioned that if he told me what had happened to him, I would never ever believe him." All of a sudden, the memory of that Bigfoot carrying me on his shoulders came hurtling back into my mind, But what had happened after that, I had no recollection whatsoever, as my mind kept drawing blanks, so those missing days still remain steeped in mystery. A year after that curious event, I was sitting under an oak tree in the park. It was an exquisitely beautiful day. A young lady was sitting down on the opposite seat to me. She began to eat her tuna fish sandwich. I noticed she was crying as she was reading her book, so I asked her if she was all right. "Oh, don't worry about me. It's just my book," she said. "It's the most beautiful, beautiful book, but the character, she's such a sweet, gentle soul, and the man she's married is actively abusing her. It's just so upsetting, that's all. I almost wish I could bypass the pages of the book and throttle him myself." I laughed. "I know what you mean. How about a cold drink to cheer you up?" "Oh, that sounds lovely," she said. "My name's Crystal, by the way." "I'm Andrew," I said. "I like it," she said, giving me an approving once-over. "It's a handsome name for a very handsome man, if you don't mind my saying." "Well, I don't quite know what to say to that," I said. "It's a long time since anyone's called me handsome." "Really?" said Crystal, raising a quizzical brow. "You do surprise me. Have you looked at yourself lately in the mirror? You're in great shape." I opened my wallet to show her a picture of me in my fatter days. "That was you," she said, looking stunned. "How much weight have you lost?" "About 55 kilos, I said. "You're still handsome in that photograph," she said, "even with all that extra weight. You've got lovely eyes." Try as I might to convince Crystal that I was not perfect and that my ex-wife had called me repugnant, she somehow couldn't see it. "I've never been obsessed with how a man looks," she told me. "Looks are fleeting like the seasons. You can sport a full head of hair in the summer, and by the winter you've shed it all, like the leaves on the trees. But that's not what really counts," she said. "Real beauty comes from within, and you have lots of that. You'll probably not be surprised to learn that this wonderful woman is now my wife. So there you are. That's my story." Wow, that was a fabulous story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.